The desperate job seeker. Zara stood in a long line at the job center, her heart heavy with worry. She clutched a small bag in her hands, the only thing she had left. Around her, aliens of different shapes and sizes waited for their turn, their faces filled with the same desperation. But Zara knew she had the lowest chance of getting a job. She was from the Varan species, a small and weak alien race. She was also a widow, alone, struggling, and unwanted. Employers did not like hiring widows, especially widows with children. They thought she would be too distracted, too weak, too much trouble. The line moved slowly. Every time someone walked away from the counter, Zara saw the same pattern. Aliens with strong bodies got hired, those with connections were welcomed, and those with money could pay for better jobs. But Zara had nothing. Her stomach growled. She had not eaten a proper meal in days. Her small son, Hero, was waiting for her at the tiny metal shelter they lived in. If she did not find a job today, they would have no food for tomorrow. Finally, her turn came. She stepped forward, forcing herself to stand tall, even though she was shaking inside. The recruiter, the large green-skinned alien, glanced at her and sighed. Next. Zara's hands trembled. I need work. Any job. The recruiter barely looked at her. Experience. I used to work as a cleaner. I can cook. I can fix small machines, she said quickly. The recruiter laughed. We don't need weak workers. He waved his hand, already calling the next person. Zara felt her heart sink. Please, she whispered. I'll do anything. The recruiter didn't even look at her. No one will hire you. Get out of the line. The words stabbed into her like a knife. Zara stepped back, feeling the eyes of others on her, some filled with pity, some filled with amusement. Her hands clenched into fists. Is this my fate? To be rejected again and again. She walked out of the job center, her feet heavy. The world outside was cold and harsh. Spaceships roared above. Merchants shouted about their goods, and rich aliens moved past her without a glance. She had no place in this world. Zara sat on a bench, staring at the ground. What will I tell Kiro? That his mother failed him again. She closed her eyes, trying to fight back the tears. Then she heard a voice. Looking for a job. She opened her eyes and turned. A human stood in front of her. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp eyes. He wore a black coat, his boots dusty from long travels. There was something different about him, something dangerous, yet calm. Humans were rare in this sector. Zara had never spoken to one before. She hesitated. Yes, I am. The man studied her for a moment. You don't look like a fighter. What can you do? Zara's heart pounded. Why was a human asking her this? I can clean. I can cook. I can fix things, small repairs. The man smirked. Useful skills. You got a name? Zara, she said quietly. He nodded. I'm Captain Rook. Captain. Zara's stomach twisted. Was he a soldier? A pirate? She didn't know. Rook tilted his head. You ever worked on a ship? Zara shook her head. No problem. Rook said. You learn fast. She nodded quickly. Yes. I will do anything. I need this job. Rook looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You're hired. Zara's breath caught. What? You heard me, Rook said. I need a worker on my ship. Cleaning. Fixing small things. You'll get food, a bed, and pay. Zara stared at him. No one ever gave her a chance. No one. And yet, this human, this stranger, just hired her without hesitation. She swallowed hard. Why? Rook's smirk faded. His eyes were serious. Because humans don't care about where you come from. We care about what you can do. Zara felt a lump in her throat. This was hope. A small light in the darkness she had been trapped in for so long. She took a deep breath. I won't disappoint you. Rook gave a small grin. We'll see. He turned and walked towards a rusted spaceship parked nearby. Come on, Zyra. Let's see if you survive your first day. Zyra took one last look at the job center, the place that had rejected her. Then she followed the human. For the first time in years, she had a future. A human's unusual offer. Zyra followed Captain Rook through the busy streets of the space station, her mind racing. Was this real? She had spent months searching for a job, facing rejection after rejection, until this human, a complete stranger, had offered her one in seconds. No questions about her race, status, or past. No mocking glances. No cruel laughter. She clenched her hands. Is this a trick? Is he testing me? The deeper they walked into the station, the louder and rougher the streets became. Merchant stalls turned into weapon vendors, black market dealers, and illegal mechanics. The air smelled of burnt fuel and something metallic. Zyra hesitated. Rook glanced back. Something wrong. Zyra swallowed. Where are we going? To my ship. He smirked. You didn't think I was running a fancy business, did you? That confirmed her fears. This wasn't a normal job. But what choice did she have? Rook stopped in front of a docking bay. The massive steel doors slid open, revealing a rusted, patched-up freighter. It wasn't sleek or modern like the expensive ships she had seen before. This one had scars, blaster marks, dents, and burned streaks from past battles. This is your ship? She asked, surprised. Rook chuckled, disappointed. Zyra quickly shook her head. No, I just thought humans had bigger, better ships. We do, he said. But I'm not one of the rich ones. He led her up the loading ramp. Inside, the ship was cramped, messy, and filled with the smell of metal, grease, and burnt circuits. The walls had patchwork repairs, exposed wires, and dim lighting. Zyra's stomach turned. What kind of ship is this? Before she could ask, a voice called out. Captain, who's the stray? Zyra turned to see a massive alien leaning against the wall. He had gray skin, 4 arms, and a scar running down his cheek. His black eyes studied her with suspicion. Rook answered casually, New worker, Zyra. The alien snorted. This tiny thing. She won't last a day. Zyra clenched her fists but said nothing. She had heard these words before. Guess we'll find out, Rook said. Where's the rest of the crew? Fixing the fuel thrusters, the alien grumbled. Ship's acting up again. Rook sighed. Of course it is. He turned to Zyra. Come on, let's get you set up. She followed him through narrow corridors until they reached a small storage room. Inside, there was a thin mattress, a crate for storage, and a single light overhead. Zyra's heart sank. This was her room. Not much, Rook admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. But it's yours. She dropped her bag onto the crate. It was better than the streets. Your job's simple, Rook continued. Clean the ship, fix what you can, help in the kitchen, and if we run into trouble, stay out of the way. She frowned. Trouble? Rook gave a mischievous smirk. You'll see. Before she could ask, a loud alarm blared through the ship. A red light flashed above them. Perfect timing, Rook muttered. Stay here. But Zyra didn't stay. She followed him to the cockpit, where the crew was already at their stations. The large alien from before was seated at the weapons panel, while a thin reptilian alien was checking the ship's scanners. What's happening? Rook asked, taking the pilot's seat. Patrol ship coming this way, the reptilian hissed. Looks like they're scanning for smugglers. Zyra's blood ran cold. Smugglers. She had been hired by criminals. She should have run. But before she could, the ship lurched violently, knocking her off balance. Rook cursed. They're scanning us. They think we're carrying illegal cargo. The gray-skinned alien grinned. Well, they're right. Zyra's breath hitched. She was trapped on a smuggler's ship, about to be caught by patrol officers. What had she gotten herself into? Rook glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. Still want the job? Zira's hands trembled. If she said no, she would be thrown off at the next station, alone, starving, with nothing. She took a deep breath and stood up straight. "I'll do whatever I need to survive," she said. Rook's smirk widened. "Good. Then let's see how you handle your first escape." The ship's engines roared as they prepared to flee. Zira had stepped onto a human ship, and her life would never be the same again. The dangerous job. Zira had never been in a space chase before. Her heart pounded as she gripped the back of the co-pilot's chair, her eyes fixed on the glowing red dots flashing on the screen. Patrol ships, 3 of them, were closing in fast. Captain Rook's fingers flew over the controls, his face calm but sharp. "All right, let's see if we can lose them before they start shooting." The gray-skinned alien, whose name Zira had learned was Brack, let out a laugh. "Or we can shoot first." He slammed his fist on a button, and the ship's turret cannons roared to life. Zira stumbled back as the ship shook violently. The thin reptilian alien, Selleck, hissed from his station. "Brack, you idiot. We can't win a fight against patrol ships." Brack just grinned. Who said anything about winning? The ship dived sharply, dodging a streak of blue plasma fire from the patrol ships. Zira grabbed onto the wall, her stomach lurching. "I thought we were smugglers," she shouted over the alarms. Rook smirked. "Smugglers, pirates, survivors. Depends on the day." Zira swallowed hard. What had she gotten herself into? The first test. As the ship swerved through an asteroid field, Rook barked, "Selleck, scramble our signal." Brack, keep their targeting systems jammed. Zira stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold. She had no experience in combat, no idea what to do. Rook noticed. "Zira. Engine room now. The thrusters are overheating. Vent the excess fuel." Her breath caught. He's giving me an order. He trusts me to do something important. She nodded quickly and ran. The corridors of the ship rattled as another plasma blast hit their shields. Zira nearly fell, but caught herself, pushing forward. She burst into the engine room, a tight space filled with whirring machinery and blinking lights. The heat was unbearable. She could smell burning metal. She spotted the fuel pressure valve, just as a warning light blinked red. Overheating. If it burst, the whole ship could explode. She grabbed a wrench from the wall and forced the valve open. Steam hissed out, and the temperature in the room dropped slightly. The warning light flickered, then turned green. Zira exhaled. She had done it. She slammed the comm button. Fuel vented. Rook's voice came through, full of amusement. "Not bad. Rookie." She blinked. Did he just compliment me? But before she could think too much, the ship gave a final lurch, and then silence. The alarms shut off. Zira hurried back to the cockpit. "We lost them," Selleck announced, his claws clicking against the console. Brack leaned back, looking bored. "That was easy." Zira stared at them, all in disbelief. "Easy? That was easy." Rook turned to her. "So still want the job?" Zira crossed her arms. "You didn't exactly tell me I was signing up for a death trap." Brack laughed. "If you wanted safe, you shouldn't have joined a smuggler crew, little one." Zira glared at him. "I didn't exactly have options." Rook studied her, then nodded. "Fair enough." He leaned back in his chair. "You did good back there, Zira. Looks like you're more useful than just a cleaner." She felt something stir in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had recognized her worth. "Get some rest," Rook said. "We have a delivery to make." The cargo. After the adrenaline faded, exhaustion hit Zira like a wave. She returned to her tiny quarters, sitting on the thin mattress. The metal walls around her felt cold, unfamiliar. Her thoughts drifted to Kiro, her son. Was she making the right choice? She had left him with another struggling widow at the space station, promising she would find work. But was this really a better life? She had imagined cleaning tables, fixing broken pipes, not dodging laser fire from patrol ships. She sighed and ran a hand through her short silver hair. "What am I doing?" A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to see Selleck standing there, his thin green scales catching the dim light. He handed her a metal food container. "You need to eat." Zira blinked. "Why?" Selleck shrugged. "Your crew now. Crew takes care of each other." Then he walked off. Zira looked down at the warm meal in her hands. Crew. She had never been part of a crew before. She closed the door and sat on the bed, taking a careful bite. Maybe, just maybe, this was the first step to something better. But as she finished her meal, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. What exactly were they smuggling? The hidden truth. The next morning, Rook gathered the crew in the cargo bay. Zira stood among them, nervous but determined. She was done being afraid. Rook pressed a button on the control panel. The cargo bay doors hissed open, revealing large metal crates stacked on top of each other. Brack cracked his knuckles. "Finally, let's get paid." Zira frowned. "What's inside?" Rook gave her a long look. Then, without a word, he opened one of the crates. Zira gasped. Inside was not weapons, not stolen tech, not illegal drugs, but people. Thin, malnourished aliens, some young, some old, huddled together inside the crate, their eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Zira's breath caught. "You're smuggling people." Rook exhaled. "Not smuggling. Rescuing." Zira stared at him in shock. Everything she thought she knew about this crew had just changed. And now she had a choice to make. First mission. A trial by fire. Zira couldn't breathe. She stared at the frightened beings huddled together inside the crate. Thin, exhausted, some barely awake. Their skin was covered in bruises and scars, their eyes hollow with fear. These weren't criminals. They were captives. Slaves. Her chest tightened. All this time, she had assumed Rook's crew was just smugglers, running illegal cargo to make credits. But this was different. Her voice shook as she asked, where did they come from?" Rook exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "A Zorvan labor camp. They were being sent to the mines." Zira felt a chill run through her. Zorvans, a brutal, warlike species known for treating weaker races as nothing more than property. The gray-skinned alien, Brack, folded his massive arms. "We're taking them to a safe colony. Somewhere the Zorvans can't reach." Zira looked between them. "You're not smugglers," she whispered. "You're rescuers." Rook gave a small, knowing smile. Something like that. Zira's hands clenched. She had spent years being told that no one cared about people like her, that the strong crushed the weak, and the weak just had to accept it. And yet here was a human crew, risking their lives to fight against that idea. Her breath was shaky as she asked, "What do you need me to do?" Rook studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Help get them settled. They're scared, hungry, and exhausted. Some need medical attention. Think you can handle that?" Zira straightened her back. "Yes." She turned toward the crate, pushing aside her fear, and reached out her hand to the nearest captive, a young alien child with wide, terrified eyes. Zira knew fear. She had lived it, breathed it, and she wasn't about to let these people face it alone. The child hesitated, then slowly took her hand. For the first time in years, Zira felt needed. A new purpose. The next few hours were a blur of work. Zira moved quickly, distributing food and water to the captives. Some were too weak to even lift the cups, so she helped them drink. Others were badly injured, bruised, burned, bleeding. She worked with Selleck, the reptilian crew member, to clean and bandage wounds. To her surprise, the crew didn't mock her or doubt her. Brack, despite his rough attitude, brought over blankets and supplies without a word. Selleck, though sharp-tongued, patiently showed her how to apply medical patches. And Rook, He simply watched her work with an approving nod. By the time they had settled everyone in, Zyra's body ached, but her heart felt different, lighter. She wasn't just working for survival anymore. She was helping. The mission gets complicated. The ship's intercom buzzed to life. "Captain, we've got a problem." Brack's voice came through. Rook's expression darkened. He motioned for Zyra to follow as he strode to the cockpit. The moment they stepped in, alarms were blaring. Selleck's claws moved over the controls. "We're being hailed." "Who?" Rook asked. Selleck hesitated. "A Zorvan battleship." Zyra's blood went cold. On the screen, a transmission flickered to life. A hulking Zorvan commander appeared, a reptilian beast with red eyes and jagged armor. "This is Commander Kaver of the Zorvan Empire. We know you are harboring stolen property." The crew tensed. Kaver's voice was low, full of deadly promise. "Turn them over now, and we will let you live." Zyra's stomach twisted. She knew what the Zorvans did to slaves who tried to escape. They wouldn't just punish them. They would make an example out of them. Rook leaned back in his chair, completely calm. "Stolen property. Sorry, I don't see any of that on my ship." Kaver's red eyes glowed with fury. "Do not test me, human." Rook smirked. "Oh, I'd never." Then, without warning, he cut the transmission. Zyra's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? They're going to attack us." "Yup." Rook's fingers flew over the controls. "Brack, power the shields. Selleck, give me a full scan of their weapons." Brack grinned. "This is about to get fun." Selleck hissed. "Their ship is 3 times our size and has missile launchers that could turn us to dust." Rook cracked his knuckles. "All right then, time for Plan B." Zyra swallowed. "What's Plan B?" Rook grinned. "We run." The escape. The Iron Fang lurched forward, engines roaring to life. Zyra gripped the wall as the ship shot through space at full speed. Behind them, the Zorvan battleship fired, massive plasma cannons lighting up the darkness. The ship shook violently as one blast grazed their shields. "We won't last long like this." Selleck hissed. Rook's eyes gleamed. "Then we need a distraction." He turned to Zyra. "Think you can handle the engine controls?" Her breath caught. "Me? In the middle of a space battle?" But she saw the trust in Rook's eyes. She nodded. "Tell me what to do." Rook smirked. "Good answer." A desperate gamble. Zyra sprinted to the engine room. She barely understood how the ship worked, but she remembered what Rook had told her before. Stay calm. Fix the problem. Don't panic. The ship shook again, throwing her against the wall. A warning screen flashed. Critical damage detected. Zyra clenched her teeth. Not today. She grabbed the nearest control panel and rerouted power, directing everything to the hyperdrive. Back in the cockpit, Selleck shouted, "We're ready for a jump." Rook slammed a button. "Punch it." The Iron Fang shuddered as the hyperdrive kicked in. And then, boom, they disappeared into hyperspace. Aftermath. Zyra stumbled into the cockpit, breathing hard. "Did we?" Brack let out a loud laugh. "Ha, those Zorvan bastards won't find us now." Rook turned to her, arms crossed. "Not bad for your first real mission." Zyra looked around the crew, these people who had risked everything to save others. She had spent so long believing that no one cared about the weak. But humans were different. She straightened her back. "What's next?" Rook smirked. "Now, we get these people to safety. And then, we find more to save." Zyra nodded. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She had a purpose, and she wasn't going to let it go. Betrayal and a dark secret. Zyra sat in the dimly lit cargo bay, watching over the rescued captives as they rested on the metal floor. Some were asleep, huddled under old blankets. Others sat silently, their eyes hollow from years of suffering. She had seen hopelessness before, but never like this. A young alien girl, no older than her own son Kiro, clung to her mother's arm. The mother gently stroked her daughter's hair, whispering words of comfort. Zyra's heart clenched. She thought of Kiro. Was he safe? Was he eating? Had she made the right choice leaving him behind? Her fingers curled into a fist. She had to believe she had. At least here, she wasn't powerless anymore. A voice broke her thoughts. Still awake, she turned to see Rook, leaning against the doorway with his usual half-smirk. Zyra exhaled. Hard to sleep when you're surrounded by people who've suffered more than you can imagine. Rook crossed his arms. That's why we do this. Zyra hesitated before asking, how did you start this rescue work? Rook's smirk faded. He was silent for a moment before he finally spoke. I was in the Terran Navy once. Special Ops. Zyra blinked. That explained a lot. His leadership, his calm under pressure, his ability to handle a Zorvan battleship chasing them through space like it was just another Tuesday. Rook continued, his voice lower now. One of our missions, we were supposed to take down a Zorvan slave ship. Command said the mission was to recover stolen assets. His jaw tightened. They didn't mean the prisoners. They meant the ship. Zyra's breath caught. So, what did you do? Rook exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I ignored orders. Freed the prisoners. Burned the ship to the ground. Zyra's eyes widened. Command wasn't happy, Rook said, a bitter smile crossing his lips. Turns out, politics mattered more than people. They discharged me, labeled me a rogue. He spread his arms. So I decided to make it official. Zyra stared at him. This man, this human, had thrown away his entire career to do what was right. No wonder people followed him. No wonder she had followed him. A sharp beep interrupted the moment. Selleck's voice came through the intercom. Captain, we've got a problem. Rook sighed. Of course we do. Zyra followed as he hurried to the cockpit. The betrayal. Brack was already there, his massive arms crossed. Selleck was at the controls, his claws moving quickly over the ship's scanners. His face was tense. What is it? Rook asked. Selleck's voice was sharp. Someone sent out a signal beacon. Rook's eyes darkened. A tracking signal. Selleck nodded. Encrypted. Someone on board sent it. Zyra stiffened. A traitor. Someone on this ship had just given away their location. Rook's voice dropped dangerously low. How long until someone finds us? Selleck checked the readings. Depends who received it. Could be scavengers, bounty hunters, or the Zorvans. Zyra's blood ran cold. Brack cracked his knuckles. I say we start questioning everyone. Rook nodded. Wake the crew. No one leaves the room until we find out who did this. Interrogation. The crew, along with Zyra and the refugees, gathered in the common area. Rook stood at the front, his presence demanding silence. Someone on this ship just sent out a signal. His voice was calm, but firm. That means someone here is working against us. The room tensed. Zyra looked at the frightened faces of the rescued captives. They had suffered enough. Would one of them really betray their only hope of freedom? Or was it someone on the crew? Brack's sharp eyes scanned the room. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Silence. Then, I did it. The voice was soft but clear. Zyra turned sharply. A young alien male, no older than 20, stepped forward. His eyes were filled with guilt and defiance. Rook studied him. Why? The boy swallowed. You don't understand. My family is still in a Zordan camp. I made a deal. If I signaled them, they promised to let my family go. A heavy silence settled over the room. Zyra's heart ached. He wasn't a villain. He was just desperate. But the reality was brutal. His signal had put everyone in danger. Rook's jaw clenched. Do you have any proof they would have kept their word? The boy lowered his head. Silence was his answer. Zira stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. I know what it's like to want to save your family, but the Zorvans don't make fair deals. They lie. They would have killed you and taken us all. Tears filled the boy's eyes. He knew she was right. Brack's voice was low and dangerous. We should throw him out of the airlock. The boy flinched. Zira's stomach twisted. No. Rook held up a hand, silencing them. His eyes were locked on the boy. Then he spoke. You made a choice, a bad one. But I don't believe in throwing people away. The boy's shoulders trembled. What? What happens now? Rook's voice was cold. We're taking you to the colony. You'll stay there, but you are not coming with us. The boy swallowed hard but nodded. Zira let out a slow breath. She wasn't sure if she agreed or disagreed, but she knew one thing. The danger wasn't over yet. The incoming threat. Selleck's voice broke the silence. Captain, we've got incoming. Rook turned sharply. Who? Selleck's claws hovered over the screen. 3 ships, not Zorvan. Mercenaries. Brack growled. Bounty hunters. Zira's pulse spiked. Rook's eyes hardened. They must have intercepted the signal. He turned to the crew. Battle stations, we're not getting caught today. Zira's stomach twisted. She had thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The chase and sacrifice. The iron fang trembled as alarms screamed through the ship. Selleck's claws danced over the control panel, his voice sharp and urgent. 3 bounty hunter ships, armed, fast, and closing in. Brack cracked his knuckles. They want to fight. Let's give them one. Rook shook his head. Not this time. His voice was calm, but his eyes were deadly serious. Zira's stomach twisted. The ship was already damaged from their escape from the Zorvans. Another fight. They wouldn't last. She felt it, the heavy, sinking weight in her gut. They were trapped. The hunt begins. The bounty hunters weren't ordinary mercenaries. These were Void Reapers, a ruthless group that specialized in tracking and capturing fugitives for the highest bidder. And right now, Rook's crew was the prize. Selleck hissed. They're hailing us. Rook leaned back in his chair. Let's hear them. A crackling voice filled the cockpit. This is Captain Varric of the Void Reapers. You're carrying stolen cargo. Zira clenched her fists. They weren't cargo. They were people. You have 2 options, Varric continued. Surrender the fugitives, or be destroyed. Silence filled the ship. Brack bared his teeth. I hate bounty hunters. Rook smirked. Same. Then, without hesitation, he cut the transmission and slammed a button. The iron fang pitched sharply downward, its engines roaring as it dived into the thick nebula clouds below. The hunt was on. A dangerous gamble. Zira barely kept her balance as the ship lurched sideways. Hold on, Rook shouted, jerking the controls. The iron fang skimmed past a floating asteroid, the ship's hull grazing the rocky surface. Brack laughed. You're insane, Captain. Rook's eyes gleamed. That's why we're still alive. Selleck snarled. They're following us. 3 ships, closing in fast. Zira felt her pulse pound. If they got caught, they'd be sold, imprisoned, or worse. She refused to let that happen. What can I do? She asked. Rook glanced at her. Engine room. We need more speed. Zira nodded and ran, racing against death. The engine room was a storm of noise and heat. Sparks flew from exposed wires, metal groaned under pressure, and the warning lights blinked red. Zira's heart pounded. She grabbed a hydro spanner and yanked open a control panel. Inside, wires were frayed and melting. The ship was overheating. She didn't have time to be careful. She gritted her teeth and started rerouting power manually. Her hands burned from the heat, but she kept working. She wouldn't let the ship fail. Not now. The betrayal strikes again. Suddenly, the door behind her slammed shut. Zira spun around, only to see the young alien boy who had betrayed them earlier standing in the doorway. Her breath caught. "What are you doing?" His eyes were filled with regret, but his hands were shaking. I'm sorry," he whispered. He raised a small device. Zura's eyes widened. A detonator. He was going to disable the ship's engines completely. If he did that, they were dead. "Put it down," she said, keeping her voice calm. Tears filled his eyes. "I have no choice." "You do," Zyra said, stepping closer. "But if you do this, the Zorvans won't let your family go. They'll kill them. And us." The boy froze. Zyra saw the war inside him. Fear, guilt, desperation. His hands trembled. Then, he dropped the detonator. Zyra lunged forward, grabbed the device, and yanked him away from the control panel. He collapsed, sobbing. "I just wanted to save them," he whispered. Zyra's chest ached, but there was no time for sympathy. She turned back to the controls and finished rerouting power. The ship roared to life. Engines stabilized. She shouted into the comm. Rook's voice came back instantly. Perfect timing. Then, the ship shook violently. The sacrifice. Zyra stumbled as the impact nearly knocked her off her feet. Selleck's voice came through the speakers, sharp with fear. "They hit our fuel lines. We're losing power." Rook's voice was tight. "We won't make it to the colony at this rate." Brack growled. "Then what do we do?" Silence. Then Rook said something that chilled Zyra to the bone. "There's only one way." Zyra's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Rook took a deep breath. "We need to send a decoy ship." Brack's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" Rook nodded. Brack's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Zyra felt the tension in the air. Something was wrong. Then Rook turned to her. "You're taking the escape pod, Zyra." Her breath hitched. "What?" "No. The pod is fast enough to reach the colony undetected," Rook said. "You'll take the refugees. Get them to safety." Zyra's mind reeled. "And what about you?" Rook's smirk faded. "We'll lead the bounty hunters away." Zyra froze. That was a death sentence. Her chest ached. She had seen people abandon her before. But this was different. "Captain." "No arguments," Rook said, softer this time. "We need someone to make sure they survive." "That's you." Zyra's throat tightened. Rook turned away, already barking orders. The decision was made. Final moments. The escape pod was small and cramped, but it held the refugees. Zyra sat in the pilot's chair, her hands shaking as she input the coordinates. Through the tiny window, she saw the Iron Fang drifting into the darkness, its engines glowing faintly. Then Rook's voice crackled through the speakers. "You're clear to go." Zyra's hands tightened on the controls. Everything in her screamed to stay, to fight. But she thought of Kiro, the refugees, the people depending on her. She forced herself to press the launch button. The pod ejected, breaking away from the ship. Through the window, she watched the Iron Fang turn sharply, diving straight toward the bounty hunters. They were leading them away. Zyra's vision blurred. Then, the screen cut to black. A new beginning. Zyra sat rigid in the pilot's seat of the escape pod, her fingers clenched tight around the control levers. The pod shuddered as it drifted through the void, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the shrinking image of the Iron Fang in the distance. She could still see it, small but defiant, a lone ship weaving through the darkness as the 3 bounty hunter vessels swarmed after it like vultures. Her heart ached. She had never felt this kind of pain before. Rook had saved her. He had saved all of them. And now he was out there alone, facing enemies that would never let him go. A lump rose in her throat, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't break now. Not while she still had people to protect. She turned back toward the pod's passenger hold. The rescued aliens, her new responsibility, sat huddled in fear, their eyes filled with exhaustion and uncertainty. A young girl clutched her mother's arm. An old man whispered silent prayers to a god Zira didn't know. She straightened her shoulders. They had lost so much, but she wouldn't let them lose hope. Not after everything. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Hold on," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We're almost there." Then she punched in the final coordinates. The pod's thrusters ignited, and they shot toward the colony, the last safe place in the galaxy. The arrival at Haven's Reach. Haven's Reach wasn't just any colony. It was a hidden world, a sanctuary built by humans for those who had been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. The planet came into view, a small green world wrapped in a shielding nebula, its surface glittering with hidden cities carved into the cliffs. Zira guided the pod into the atmosphere, her grip steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The colony's defense turrets locked onto them instantly. A harsh voice crackled over the comms. "Unregistered vessel. Identify yourself." Zira pressed the speaker button. "This is Zyra," she said, her voice strong. "We're refugees from the Iron Fang." Silence. Then, a different voice, softer but urgent. "Landing Bay 4 is open. We'll be waiting." Zira exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she guided the pod toward the colony. A cold welcome. The landing was smooth, but as soon as the hatch opened, Zyra felt the tension in the air. A group of human soldiers stood waiting, their weapons at the ready. They were not welcoming smiles. They were wary, cautious. A man stepped forward, his icy blue eyes scanning the passengers. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable. "You're from Rook's crew?" he asked, his voice sharp. Zira nodded, stepping forward. "Yes." "Wait." The man cut her off. "Where's Rook?" The words hit her like a blade. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she say it? How could she admit that the man they all relied on, the one who had saved her life, was gone? She swallowed hard, forcing the lump down her throat. "He stayed behind," she said finally. Her voice sounded too quiet, too hollow. The man's jaw tightened. Then, without another word, he turned and motioned to his soldiers. "Get them inside. Give them food, medical treatment, whatever they need." The soldiers moved instantly, guiding the refugees toward the safety of the colony. But Zira stayed frozen. She didn't care about the soldiers or the questions in their eyes. She didn't care about the safety of the colony or the relief of landing. All she could think about was Rook, and whether she had just left him to die, refugee or crew. The first night at the colony was a blur. Zira helped distribute food. She bandaged wounds, comforted those who had spent years in cages. But inside, she felt lost. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't just a refugee. She had been part of something more, part of a crew. And now that crew was gone. As she sat alone outside one of the colony's metal barracks, staring up at the night sky, she heard footsteps. She turned to see the man from before, the soldier with the ice-blue eyes. He sat down beside her without a word. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "You should know, Rook's been in worse situations." Zira frowned, turning to him. "You knew him." The man's gaze didn't leave the stars. "We fought together in the war," he said. "I owed him my life." Zira's hands tightened into fists. "Then you should know, there was no way out." The man's lips curved slightly, almost a smirk. "You really think he's dead?" Zira's breath caught. A flicker of hope burned in her chest, but she didn't let it grow. "I don't know," she admitted. The man finally turned to her, his gaze steady. "Well," he said, standing up, "if he's alive, he's going to need his crew to get him back." Zira's heart slammed against her ribs. She stared at him, her mind racing. If he was right, if Rook had somehow survived, then sitting here in safety meant nothing. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She wasn't just a refugee. She was crew. And she wasn't going to let him go without a fight. She took a deep breath, stood up, and looked at the soldier. "What's your name?" she asked. He smirked. "Call me Reed." Zira nodded. Then she looked up at the sky, where the iron fang had vanished, where Rook might still be out there, fighting to survive. She took a deep breath, and then, with steel in her voice, she said, "Let's go get him." The end, for now.